Here's verse 1. It says, and he, talking about Jesus, went away from there, and he came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. Okay, let's wake up with a little Bible trivia this morning, okay? Can anybody tell me what is Jesus' hometown? Not his birthplace, but his hometown. Somebody say it. Nazareth. That's exactly right. They get there, and here's what happens. Let's look at verse 2 and 3. It says, and on the Sabbath, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astonished. If you're taking notes, I want you to circle that word. Saying, where did this man get these things? What is this wisdom given to him? How are such mighty works done by his hands? Is not this the carpenter? Is this not the son of Mary, brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? Are not his sisters here with us? And here's what it says. And they took offense at him. This is very interesting. By this point in Jesus' ministry, everywhere he goes, man, the crowds are flocking to him. Okay? Everywhere he goes, he does two things. He teaches in the synagogue, does miracles. He does the exact same thing in Nazareth. Here's what I want you to notice. The response couldn't be any more different than the other cities. The response is described in two ways in these verses, okay? Number one, it's that first word I told you to underline. It says this, they were astonished. Okay, this is a Greek word that was used 12 times in the four Gospels. It's a word that means to be greatly astounded or amazed. They look at his miracle and they're astonished, and yet here's what that doesn't mean. It doesn't mean they were impressed. This word isn't always positive in nature, and we see that by the questions that they begin to ask. They ask 5 questions. I'm going to summarize it into 3 main categories. Here's the first question they ask. Where is this teaching coming from? Like, where's Jesus getting this? This is a question that in many ways makes sense because here, you got to remember, in Nazareth, Jesus was just a kid that grew up down the street, okay? They knew he didn't come from a distinguished background. They knew he wasn't trained by like a famous rabbi. They knew he hadn't written any books, okay? They knew Jesus. They knew his family, okay? And so when they look at him, they think, well, all he's got is this ragtag group of disciples, and they aren't impressive either. There's no one in his little circle of influence that you're like, man, that's an Ivy Leaguer. That's somebody that, man, Jesus, wow, well done. No, this was a collection of nobodies, fishermen, a tax collector, a political zealot. No, nothing that would have been off the radar, right? And so these Nazarites, they look at Jesus and they're like, man, isn't this the guy that we played basketball with outside the temple? Like, where is he getting this teaching? Where's he getting it? Leads to question 2. How is he doing miracles? Now, again, this is one, they know Jesus. How's this guy doing miracles? I think a lot of times we assume that if we could go back into the New Testament, when they saw the miracles of Jesus, we kind of assume, well, surely they believe that was from God. It's not the case. Again, back in chapter 3 of the book of Mark, Jesus does miracles, and here's what the Pharisees do. They look at the miracles and they say, Jesus, you must be possessed not by God, but by Satan. That's where your power is coming from. And so when they say, man, these miracles, they're amazing, they're not saying, wow, look at what God's doing. They're like, Jesus, what are you doing behind the scenes to make that happen? You got that person that is acting that they're sick and then they're healed? Like, are you using evil forces? Like, what's going on here? How is this guy doing miracles? And that leads to the third question. This is the most pivotal question of all of them. Here's what they say. Is this not the son of Mary? And that may seem like a benign question to you in this room. Here's what you need to understand in that culture. No one was referred to as the son of the mother, okay? In other words, it's not, man, Brady, son of Rachel. If you're going to describe, it's Brady, son of Ryan. It's Devin Bethea, son of Nick Bethea. Like that's how they would talk about individuals. And so when they say this question, isn't this the son of Mary? Do you know what they're saying? I think you probably do. Some of you in this room are from a small town. Here's what you know about a small town. They don't forget things, do they? They don't forget the history. Here's one thing they are not going to forget. Mary and Joseph get married in November. There's a baby in December. What are they saying here? It's really pretty scathing. They're saying, okay, Jesus, you think you're such a big deal. We don't even know who your daddy is. You don't have a dad. Maybe it's Joseph. We doubt it. But you're a man without a father. In our culture, here's what that means. You are a nobody. You see the question that they're asking here? All this leads to their second response. It's not just that they were astonished, but what's the second thing it says? They took offense at Jesus. They took offense. This word offense is a Greek word. Here's the word, scandalizomai. Okay, scandalizomai. What English word do you think we get from this? Scandal. Okay? It's one thing to look at Jesus and say, man, how's this guy from way back then when doing those things? It's another thing for that to offend you and to be able to say, you know what, Jesus, you think you're a spiritual teacher? We know your background. Who do you think you are coming back to Nazareth with this ragtag group of disciples? What are you trying to show off? That's them. To be scandalized is not just to disagree with Jesus. It's to be outraged by Jesus. It's to be repelled by Jesus. Do you see the difference here? You see the people from his hometown. It's like many of you when you go back to your high school reunion. You know, you go back in and there's always that one or two people, they made all sorts of money or they got famous somehow and they want everybody to know about it, right? How do you respond? That's offensive, is it not? You're repelled by that person. That's the people of Nazareth toward Jesus, even though he had done none of those things. Well, Jesus responds in verse 4. Let's read it together. It says, and Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor. In other words, they get honor wherever they go, except where? In his hometown and among his relatives and his own household. The people of Nazareth are actually sinning because of their unbelief toward Jesus. It's an amazing picture that we see. If you're taking notes, I want you to write down this point, and this may be one of the most important things I say this entire morning, okay? Write this down. Familiarity with Jesus caused them to miss Jesus. These people were more familiar with Jesus than anybody else in the world at this time. And yet it is this group that missed Jesus. Friend, don't run past that this morning. Do you realize today that you can grow up around the things of Jesus? You can hear story after story. Teenagers, you can be in the youth group and hear stories and stories about Jesus. You can be around the things of Jesus. You can serve in the things of Jesus. And friend, on the day that you die, you can still go to eternity in hell apart from Jesus. There's a big difference with being familiar with Jesus and actually knowing him personally, where you trust him and you surrender your life to him. You say, Ryan, well, how do I know? How do I know if I really know Jesus or if I've just been around the things of Jesus? Can I just give you a verse? Jesus himself says this, John 14, verse 21, he says this: whoever has my commandments and keeps them, he it is who loves me. Now, is Jesus saying that it's the obeying of the commandments that brings somebody into a relationship with God? No. But what is he saying? An obedient life, a life of fruitfulness and obedience is what accompanies somebody who knows Jesus, who loves him. And so here's a question for you today. Are you just doing a lot of religious duty? Are you just fine being familiar with the things of God? Some of you have been around church a long time. Some of you are basing your salvation on something you did when you were 6 years old, and yet if you look back at the course of your life, there's no pattern of obedience. There's no pattern of changed life. There's no pattern of repentance. We're not looking for perfection here, okay? I'm not talking about perfection. None of us are perfect. But is there a pattern of obedience in your life, or are you just merely familiar with Jesus? Friend, if you're here today, familiarity with Jesus, sitting in this room does not bring you into salvation. Trusting in Jesus brings you into salvation. Could it be that today is the day that Jesus has given you another opportunity? Come to me. Know me. Don't just be familiar. Know me. Look with me at verse 5. This is really, really sad. It says, and he, talking about Jesus, could do no mighty work there except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them. Clarity is really important here. Here's what the text is not saying. It's not saying that Jesus' power was in some way limited because he was in Nazareth. It wasn't limited to because of the geographical location, okay? What it is saying is that the people's hardness of heart and their lack of faith caused them to miss out on experiencing the power of God in their midst. And that's a big difference there, okay? Jesus had all the power in the world. Their hard hearts kept them from seeing the power of Jesus. This is the complete opposite of what the people at Capernaum had saw, right? You go right up north to the other town, and it says what? That the people were so clamoring around Jesus that he could hardly walk through the city. Everybody wanted to be around him, with many of them believing him. In that city, that woman literally touches the edge of his garment, and what does Jesus do? She's healed. A daughter who is dead is lying in a bed. Jesus comes in, what happens? She raises from the dead. Just imagine Capernaum, this massive movement of God where they got to see extraordinary works. But then you go to Capernaum, and what does it say? A few came to Jesus, and they were healed. So what about you? Are you going to be a person that goes all in, puts your faith in Jesus, and sees God do what is unimaginable? Or are you going to be one with little faith, doubting Jesus, where you may see God do just this much in your life? We finally get to verse 6, and this is the passage that we'll close with today. This one I think is the most intriguing of all of them. Here's what it says. And he marveled. Okay, I want you to underline that word. And Jesus marveled because of what? Their unbelief. I want you to underline that word. If you can, connect the two. There's a connection. Jesus marveled at their unbelief, and then he went about among the villages teaching. This word marveled is a Greek word that means to be astonished out of one's senses, okay? In our culture, here's the word, mind blown, right? Like, mind blown. Have you ever wondered, what would blow Jesus' mind? It's a lot like asking the question, what do you buy for the guy that has everything? Like, how do you blow Jesus? He was there at creation. He's seen it all. Well, you don't actually have to wonder. The Bible tells us there were two moments, okay? Two instances where Jesus is recorded as being amazed, where his mind was blown by something. One you find right here. The people that were most familiar with him, unbelief. The other, if you want to have a little homework, is Luke chapter 7, okay? We're not going to go there today, but it's the story of a Roman centurion, okay? Someone who was not Jewish, Roman centurion. This Roman centurion finds out that Jesus is coming to town, and he's got a servant in his household who he must have cared deeply about. And so he goes and he finds Jesus, and he's like, Jesus, I need you to come back with me to my home to bring healing to my servant. Well, things get a little delayed. Jesus is doing other things. And so what does this Roman centurion do? He goes and he says, no, Jesus, actually, you don't even have to come with me. Here's what I believe. I believe that if you speak in this moment, you can bring healing to my servant. And what does Jesus do? He speaks, and immediately, even though the servant is far, far away, that servant is healed. And here's what the text says. And Jesus marveled at that man. He said, I haven't found faith like this in all of Israel. So two instances where Jesus' mind is blown. One, massive faith. Jesus, just speak and you can do it. The other, a lack of faith in his own hometown.